Once a month, Paula Pant, host of the Afford Anything podcast, answers voicemail questions the listeners send in. Here's one now.
Hi, Paula. I love the podcast. I have two separate questions for you, totally unrelated to one another. My first question is regarding vacation rental properties. Recently, a condo went up for sale in one of my favorite vacation locations, and while I might not want to rent that out for long-term tenant occupancy, I know that during peak tourist season that I could generate quite a bit of income. So I just wanted to get your thoughts and opinions on that.
I'm going to pause here so I can answer each question one at a time. So first of all, vacation rentals. There's a couple of things that I'm going to say about this. Number one, vacation rentals and long-term traditional 9 to 12 month lease situation type rentals are, in my opinion, totally apples and oranges. The best analogy that I can give is that one is being a landlord, and the other is running a hotel. So one is the real estate industry, and the other is the hospitality industry. And what I mean by that is that if you're running a vacation rental, then you or the management team that's underneath you are responsible for making sure there's enough toilet paper, cleaning the bed sheets, folding the towels, making sure that there's enough tea and coffee and maybe creamer and salt and pepper, ensuring that there are clean dish sponges and dish soap, and that the shampoo and conditioner provided is sufficient and lovely. Those are not things that a landlord does. Those are things that hotel owners do, or that, bed and breakfast owners do. Airbnb. And so that is, on the surface, because we're dealing, again, it's that concept of familiarity. Like, because you're dealing with a dwelling, it's, I think, easy to imagine that, you have a dwelling and you are renting out said dwelling. So it's easy to imagine that the only difference between the two is the duration of time under which you are renting said dwelling. But the reality is no tenant ever calls their landlord because they've run out of toilet paper. No tenant ever calls their landlord because they can't figure out how the cable TV works. That's something that vacation property owners have to deal with. And so the first question that I would invite you to ask yourself is, how much time are you willing to put into this? Because running a vacation rental and running a rental property are completely different things. Like, forget apples and oranges. We're talking like bananas and kiwis, pineapple and durian, pomegranate seed, and and tomato. Tomato is technically a fruit. Cha-ching. Avocado also. Hashtag technically a fruit. That's the official hashtag of today's podcast, is hashtag technically a fruit. Oh man, I could use that to describe myself. Okay, so that is the first thing that I would say. I don't know if you're amused by this. I am sitting here alone in my closet cracking myself up. So I hope that at least like a few of you are amused. You can tweet me at AffordAnything just to let me know if I'm a complete dork or just a total dork. Or technically a fruit. Anyway, so that's the first thing I would say about vacation rentals. And yeah, you can definitely get property management companies who will be those boots on the ground for you. You can find property management companies, particularly in vacation areas. Like, if this property is in an area that a lot of people vacation in, then there are certainly management companies there that specialize in vacation rentals and short-term rentals. So if you did want to pursue this, go to those companies and ask them the following questions. Number one, what type of occupancy do they see in the units that they represent? What are the occupancy rates? What are the vacancy rates? Because, yeah, it may seem on the surface that you're collecting like a whole bunch of really awesome gross income at high peak tourist season. But for a property owner, for a landlord, there is nothing more expensive than vacancy. Like, the only thing that could possibly be more expensive than vacancy is like a really Jack the Ripper type tenant, like the kind who pours a bag of cement in your toilet. Super worst case scenario sort of stuff. But vacancy is the most expensive thing you're going to have to deal with. And so that's the first question I would ask. What's the occupancy? What's the vacancy? What do those numbers look like year round? A second question I'd ask is what are their fees? What do they charge? Many management companies, vacation management companies, will charge as much as 50% of gross. And frankly, that's fair. They're responsible for making sure the place gets vacuumed between every turnover. They're responsible for making sure that the pillowcases get washed and then put back on the pillows. So no, they're not going to charge the 10% that a traditional 12-month landlord's property manager would charge, because that person is not putting pillowcases back on the pillow. Again, totally different lines of work. One's running a hotel, one is not. So, they're going to charge, I think, a rate that is quite fair given the responsibility that they have and the work that they do. And that could be as much as in many places, as much as 40 to 50% of your gross income. So, yeah, ask them those questions. Find out what the numbers are, because ultimately, I hope the reason that you'd be buying this property is because the numbers work out. Right? You can't see me, but I'm like elbowing your elbow right now. Like, right? You're buying this because of the numbers, not because you want to own a property in your favorite vacation spot and you want the emotional reassurance of telling yourself that the income will help it pay for itself, right? Okay, so let me repeat that, because that was a really long run-on sentence. Reason A, you're buying it because the numbers are awesome and because an investment is an investment is an investment. Reason B, you're buying it because this is your favorite vacation spot, you have an emotional attachment to wanting to own a home in this location, and you want the emotional gratification of believing that it will pay for itself. I'm hoping, here's the nod elbow, I'm hoping that your reasoning is A, because that is the only good reason to enter into an investment. Otherwise, it's far more rational if what you really want, money so that you can enjoy vacationing in the spot that you love, it's far more rational to not suboptimize your investments, to go make a more optimal investment, an investment with a great return that's somewhere else, and then use the income generated from that to rent in wherever you want to rent, whether it's in the spot that you're referencing, or Italy, or Antarctica, or Mars, wherever it is that you want to rent, you can go rent there using the money that you've earned from your investments. If I want to buy a pair of Nike running shoes, I don't go out and buy a share of Nike stock. I go out and buy the investments that I think are going to give me the best returns relative to my risk profile and timeline. And then I use the returns from those investments to buy my Nike running shoes. Does that make sense? Am I making sense here? This answer is getting really long and hopefully not too far off the rails. But I guess that is my answer in terms of what I think about vacation rentals. Number one, make sure that you're doing it for the right reason. And number two, if you are doing it for the right reason, then it's a simple math problem. I mean, then that's what it boils down to. What type of, and let me actually, this I guess can tie into the second half of your question. Oh, this can totally tie into the second half of your question. All right, let's play the second half of your question. Then I'm going to walk you through what this math problem is. Ooh, I didn't even realize I was going to have such a good tie-in. This is exciting.
My second question is regarding the cap rate. How do you go about calculating that on a property when you don't know what the rent values are, you don't know what your maintenance fees will be, things like that? I'm just having a hard time, I guess, trying to figure out how to calculate the cap rate for a property when I don't really have all of the facts and information. I don't know if you have a good suggestion on how to either estimate that or to go about finding out that information. Thanks so much, and I look forward to hearing your response.
Awesome. Okay, so here is the tie-in to the second half of your question, because your question, on the surface, your question was how do you calculate cap rate? But what I heard your question to be really under that surface is how do you estimate your expenses? And also, really, how do you estimate your income? Like, how do you estimate those numbers? Because if you knew how to estimate those numbers, then you just plug them into a formula and then you can calculate the cap rate, right? So the question really is, how do you make those estimations? So let's talk about that. And I'll walk through this in both a vacation rental and a 12-month traditional rental, all right? So let's take a vacation rental, for example. I used already the example of talking to the management companies that represent that area to find out what the occupancy and vacancy rates are. The other way that you could do that is go to Airbnb, look at other properties that are listed there, and then look at the calendar on Airbnb, you don't want to look too far out, but look like a month out and see how booked they are. And keep checking back. Like, just schedule yourself a Google Calendar reminder every Sunday night. Just keep checking back and see how scheduled they are. And you'll get a sense of the occupancy/vacancy. And so what you're going to have at that point is you're going to see the occupancy/vacancy in these properties, and you're also going to see the price point, the gross price that the property rents for per night, and you'll also see the condition of the property that merits that type of price point. So you'll have all of that data. And, the thing I like to say is there is no such thing as like price in a vacuum or occupancy in a vacuum. Those two are super closely related. And to illustrate this by using an exaggerated example, if your rent was $1, you'd have 100% occupancy. And conversely, if your rent was $1 million, you'd have 0% occupancy. So the ideal rent is somewhere between $1 to $1 million, The point that I'm trying to make is that if you imagine a seesaw, the rent price that you set and the occupancy rate that you have, like, those balance each other on that seesaw. And I guess if we could add a third leg to that seesaw somehow, the condition of the property. And I guess if you could add a fourth leg to that seesaw, it would be just how well you create the ad, the quality of the listing, the photos that you use, how well those photos are taken, the way that the listing is written. Do you have lots of features clearly bullet pointed out in a way that's easy to read and easy to skim? So now we have a 4-pointed seesaw. There's probably a term for that. So I think that's a thing on a playground. But those four, like, they all exist in balance with one another, and there is no one without the other. And so that is all of the information that you're going to be looking at. I'm sorry this isn't a more straightforward answer, but if you're trying to figure out, and again, this is specifically, this applies to both long-term 12-month leases as well as vacation rentals, but the recommendation for looking at Airbnb specifically is around vacation rentals. You want to see the properties that are at the $300 per night price point. What kind of occupancy rates are they getting? When you look at their Airbnb calendar and you look at the next week ahead, how booked are they in the next week ahead? How booked are they in the next 2 weeks ahead? And if you just keep doing that, just keep checking in once a week, you'll be able to start spotting patterns. And you look at that for the $300 per night price point, and then you look at that for the $100 per night price point. And you see what the discrepancy is, where the disparity is. You see if one has a much higher or lower occupancy rate than the other. You see how big that gulf is. And that's how you get that information. Now, if you are looking at a rental property in like a traditional 12-month rental that's not meant to be a vacation rental, then finding that information out is a bit more straightforward. Just approach the search as though you were a tenant and start looking online. Look at Zillow, Trulia, Redfin, Cozy, Craigslist. Look at any online listing from the point of view, like literally put yourself in the tenant's shoes. Imagine that you wanted to rent a property that was similar to the subject property that you have in mind. So let's say, for example, that you were thinking about investing in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-family home in the 90210 zip code, right? From the perspective of a tenant, start looking for 3-2 SFRs in that zip code and see what's available, see what condition they're in, see if they're currently vacant or if they are going to become available for rent at some indeterminate point in the future, or I guess determined point in the future. Just put yourself in the shoes of a tenant and see, go shopping as a tenant. By virtue of doing that, you will be able to see a few things. Number one, you'll be able to get a pretty good handle on the price point. Number two, you'll be able to get a pretty good handle on how quickly things disappear from the market. Because again, set your Google Calendar. If you do this search once a week and you notice lots of turnover, lots of listings going up and then almost right away coming right back down, then you know that stuff's going quickly and properties that are getting listed are not staying on the market for very long. Conversely, if you repeat the same search every week and you keep seeing the same properties over and over and over every week, and then you start to notice that the landlords, after 30 or 60 days, begin to reduce the rent, well, that's also a clue of where the market's at. So that's how you get that information about the rent. And it's worth stating, wow, this is really turning into a monologue. Thank you for bearing with me through this. So it's worth stating that, yes, there are these websites that will estimate what the rent is. You know, like Zillow does an estimate, and there's Rentometer that does an estimate. Yet, sure, there are these algorithms, but you really have to take them with a grain of salt, because an algorithm it's a machine. It's AI. It gathers a whole bunch of data without necessarily knowing the nuance of a particular market or a particular neighborhood. And yes, AI is by definition intelligent, and it's going to only become more and more intelligent over time, and it's great. And I'm certainly not a technophobe. As the host of a podcast and the owner of a blog, I'm definitely not like a technophobe in any way. I'm not a Luddite. Ooh, fancy word, Luddite. But it doesn't replace human judgment. So if you go to a website like Rentometer to try to estimate the rent, don't use that to supplant your own thinking. Arrive at your own conclusions, and then check those AI sites to see if they corroborate and or challenge what you yourself have concluded. In other words, use them as backup verification. Use them as a second opinion, not as a first. So that's how you estimate, wow, this is a big question, big answer. I don't know. That's how you estimate income. And all right, so let's go back to your first half of your second question, which is how do you calculate cap rate? What you're going to do is first you're going to calculate your potential gross rent. And potential gross rent is the amount of money that you could rent a property for at full occupancy. So if a property rents for $1,000 a month times 12 months a year, potential gross rent is $12,000, right? Then you're going to subtract for vacancies. So let's say that you estimate that this property is going to be vacant for 1 month a year. So you subtract $1,000. Now less vacancies is minus $1,000. And so the number that's left over is your effective gross rent. That is now $11,000. So your effective gross rent is the maximum potential minus vacancies equals your effective gross rent. And by the way, in the show notes, which is available at affordanything.com, in the show notes, I'm going to link to an article that's going to walk you exactly through how to calculate cap rate. So that's how you arrive at the effective gross rent. And then after that point, what you're going to do is you're going to start subtracting operating expenses. And now operating expenses include, just as though you are running any other type of business, any expense that you have that relates to the normal operation and functioning of your rental business. It does not include debt servicing because you want to first assess whether or not this property is a good deal. And if it is, then you look at financing. You don't want to conflate the two. So it's not going to take into account the principal and the interest on your loan, but it will look at property taxes, and homeowners insurance, because both of those are part of your normal and ongoing and permanent operating costs. And it'll also include any utilities that you as the landlord pay. It'll include repairs, maintenance, management fees. And wow, this is turning into a really big answer. I'm going to link to this article, which will have more detail on how to kind of go through this. But the very, very short answer, and this is really not doing this justice because this is an extremely big question. And by the way, this is what's taking me so darn long to complete building this course, is like, these questions are actually, they have really long answers. I'm building this course on rental property investing. It's not even remotely done yet. But if you're interested in learning more, if you go to affordanything.com/VIP list, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You can sign up to get updates on finding out when I will finally be done with this thing. Trust me, I am kicking myself super hard. I am more frustrated with myself than anybody else is with me. And I'm sure there's a lot of people frustrated with me for how slow I'm being. But I am super frustrated at myself for how slow I'm being because I just want this to be good and I want it to be comprehensive and I want it to really, truly answer these questions. So you can sign up for the VIP list if you want to know more about the course. But that being said, the short answer to your question, so that I can keep this podcast to a reasonable length of time, is that you can ballpark, if it's a traditional 12-month lease, ballpark, estimate that about 10% is going to go to property management, estimate that about 1% of the value of the property per year is going to go into repairs and maintenance. So in other words, $1,000 per every 100,000 of house, or $83 per month, if you want to look at it that way, per every $100,000 of house, will go towards repairs and maintenance. And then in order to get information about the utilities, go to the local utility providers, the electric company, the gas company, the water sewer company. If this house has already been used as a rental, the former landlord's profit and loss statements will have that, and the former landlord's tax records will have that. So you can always ask the former landlord for that information. So that's the bigger answer to the question. I'm not going to go super into depth because, again, this is turning into a very long answer, but that's how you get that information about what the expenses are going to be. And then, now that you've either looked at the former landlord's P&L statements or contacted the utility providers directly, as well as made some rough estimates as to repairs and maintenance. And by the way, property taxes, that's public record. So you can just look at the county records and know what the property taxes are. So that's easy enough. Insurance, you can call an agent, just get a ballpark quote. So that's how you estimate the expenses on a property. And then once you do that, you subtract those estimated operating expenses from your effective gross rent, and that leads you to your net operating income. And that net operating income, proportional to the value of the property, that is how you calculate the cap rate.
Hey, did you enjoy this excerpt from the Afford Anything podcast? Then click to download our free ebook, Escape. You'll be taken to a page where you can enter your email for immediate access to everything you need to know about escaping the 9-to-5 grind to live life on your terms. And you can also subscribe with one simple click to get alerted when new videos are uploaded.